Let's talk about family entertainment. You're about to hear the latest trends, expert insights, and behind-the-scenes stories of family fun centers. We'll be talking with arcade vendors, food vendors, attraction vendors, plus sharing life stories of owner-operators and much more. Stay tuned for engaging and informative content that will keep you coming back for more. And now, here's your host, Jeff Pierce of Atomic City Family Fun Center with the FEC World Podcast.
Hello, once again, we want to welcome you to the FEC World Podcast. I'm Jeff Pierce, and we're here to talk all things family entertainment. You know, communication is key when you have a business, whether it be family entertainment center, restaurant, or whatever the case may be. Communication is key, and I've got a guest on here today. I'm sure a lot of you already know Scott Harvey. He's the owner of Speaking of Harvey, and he is a professional speaker, author, you name it. He's got a great resume, and we're going to talk today about how important communication is in your family entertainment center. But first, Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeff. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to do this. We thank you very much. And Scott, I'm going to take just a minute before we get started here. I'm going to let everybody know that we are on Spotify, Facebook, and YouTube. So be sure to go to those social media platforms and Spotify. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, all the good things there. You know how to do it. And that way you won't miss an episode every Tuesday morning, 6 a.m. So, Scott, how you been?
I'm doing really, really well, Jeff. How's things in your world?
Going really good, staying busy. It looks like the weather, 14-day outlook, looks like it's going to be pretty good as the day we're recording. So things are warming up around here finally.
Yes.
We've been in some frigid temperatures, but things are going good.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yes. So, Scott, I'm eager to hear all about your background and ready to share that with everyone listening today. Just tell us a little bit about yourself from as far back as you want, and we're ready to listen.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I tell everybody, my family is consumers of FECs. Like, we've gone to FECs when our kids were growing up. So I'm a huge fan of what you guys do in the FEC world. And now that my kids are 24 and 20, we still go to FECs. It just changes now. We're not doing the jungle gyms. We're doing laser tag, bumper cars, all of that stuff. And grandson on the way coming in the end of May, and I'm sure we'll be taking him with us to these FECs. So all that to say, I love the memories that, man, I'm excited. We're not old enough for this, but somehow it's happened. Our oldest daughter and her husband are expecting, and so that's exciting. But that's the lens I see this from. We're huge fans of the FEC. My background is I was in law enforcement for 20 years. And in that job in law enforcement, I wasn't in it for a couple of years before I started realizing I wanted to get upstream of the problem. I was tired of the cleanup business because nobody calls the police when they're having a great day. They call the police when the wheels have fallen off and things are bad. So I started getting prevention focused very early on in my career, and I started teaching the DARE program. I got trained through the FBI as a hostage negotiator. And so everything I was doing was trying to mitigate problems and issues in the world. So educating young people how to make better choices, talking to people who are having a bad day on the phone, trying to get them out of the situation they got themselves in without causing more harm. I was also the media relations officer. So I was talking to the media. I was doing on-camera interviews. I was talking to the newspapers. I was doing all that stuff for the police department for most of my career. Well, when I was getting close to retirement, I say close, like 8 years left till I could retire, I realized I could retire from the police department at 43, which is a really young age to retire. And a public pension is a nice thing to have, but it's not anything to raise a family on. So I started thinking, what could I do as a second career? And so with 8 years left in my police career, I started speaking. I started speaking at conferences that I was already attending. I was doing that for free, and they were paying my conference registration out of it, which saved the police department money. So the police department was like, sure, we'd love for you to speak there because it saves us money. And at those presentations, people in there were like, hey, would you bring this to our staff? And so the speaking career just kind of evolved from there. And I've been speaking now professionally since 2010. I did 8 years of both jobs, getting up at 4 in the morning, working 2 or 3 hours before I went to the police department to build the speaking business. So when I retired in 2018, I could step directly into it. And that is what I've done since 2018, been a full-time speaker. As you mentioned, my book came out in 23. So it's almost 2 years old now, which is crazy
Right.
to me. And I speak in conferences and train organizations all over the country.
Yeah, and I've heard you at some of those, and you are very good at what you do. And to be honest, we speak every day, of course, but
Mhm.
the importance of how we speak is what caught my attention and what you had to tell me and others that were at these conferences. So tell me now, as far as you're a professional speaker, you
Mhm.
you coach as well. You can
I do.
coach other staff at different
Mhm.
facilities, correct?
I do. Yeah, I train people on communication related topics. So I facilitate a mastermind that meets every week on Zoom, but I also go to FECs and facilities that need to train their staff to communicate more effectively. Because one of the things I see with FECs that is a double-edged sword is a lot of your employees are teenagers. That's just the nature of the business that you're in. I'm a
Right.
huge fan of teenagers. I started out, like I said, teaching the DARE program, doing school assemblies, and a lot in my speaking career in the beginning. So I'm a huge fan of this upcoming generation, but one of the things they struggle with, and they would say this, is they struggle with face-to-face communication. They
Yeah.
grew up in a digital world, especially through the pandemic. That was reinforced to the teenagers that are working today in your facilities were young teenagers at the start of the pandemic. That's just how this is. And so it was virtual for a couple of years. School was virtual. And so face-to-face communication it's their kryptonite. It's their awkward and they run from awkward more than anybody I've ever seen in my life. And even with my two daughters, that was the one thing we had to work with them on is they're like, well, this is awkward. I'm like, yeah, it is, but you've got to push through the awkward to find the awesome that's on the other side. And when with my kids, that looked like, if we're in a restaurant and they're 13, 14, 15, and they're like, Dad, I want to order this, but I don't want this and this that comes with it. I'm like, you're going to have to ask the waitress or the waiter that question.
Yeah.
No, you ask him, Dad. I'm not going to ask him. You're going to have a conversation with an adult. It's going to go fine. You
Mhm.
might make a mistake, but you'll learn from it. They'll help you, and you're going to have this interaction. So, those are the things we did with our kids, and those are the things I do today with organizations. Is even Fortune 500 companies that I've done work for, their 20 somethings don't want to call people on the phone. They
Mhm.
would rather send a text or an email because that's how they grew up. And I tell
Yeah.
them, you can do that, but the competition who's actually making phone calls, they'll pass you by.
Yeah. Well, that kind of segues into my next question.
Mhm.
I think it plays a role, and I'm just going to get your professional opinion. Do you feel that cell phones may have hurt the communication world in younger generations and even young adults?
Okay, this is a great question. I love this question. And I'm not going to say it hurt, I'm going to say it changed. It
Okay.
changed communication because back when we were first entering the workforce, yeah, people hired us for our character and they trained us for skills, right?
Right.
They hired us because we would work hard. We would show up when we said we would show up. We would communicate with people. We could do that.
Hmm.
They trained us on the software and the programming and all of the job related skills that we needed, right?
Hmm.
So today, what I'm seeing with this new generation that's upcoming, which I said I'm a huge fan of, we're hiring for character a little. We're actually hiring people who already have digital skills, which is really the first that this has ever happened. The first generation we've ever had. They have digital skills that pass us, right? So we don't
Hmm.
have to teach them that. What does that mean? We have to teach them some of the things that we already knew. We can't assume they know how to have a face-to-face conversation. That would be unfair of us to assume. When
Hmm.
we got hired, Jeff, in our first jobs, everybody had face-to-face conversations or they picked up the telephone. That was the only option.
Yeah.
So we're hiring a workforce that's very digitally entrenched and they're very good. If you show them your software, they're going to pick it up quicker than we did because it's
Yeah.
native to them, but they're going to struggle with the face-to-face communication. So we're still teaching skills. We're still hiring character. We want hard workers, that kind of stuff. But we're teaching people skills instead of teaching digital skills, which is what we had to be taught when we were first hired. So cell phones have changed the communication game. I'm not willing to say they've broken it.
Hmm. So you're telling me that you and your family, you visit FECs a lot, and that's just
Yes,
things that you do. Do you catch yourself watching staff and paying attention to see how their communication is with you as a guest?
I do. I do. And, sometimes, and I get it, sometimes when you're in the vesting room of laser tag or something, like this is the 50th time they've done this presentation today, right? And
Yeah.
they're bored with it. And that comes across sometimes. But what I love are the people who treat it like an acting job.
Right.
Because when I taught DARE classes, Jeff, I would teach 5 classes in the same day, and it was the same lesson 5 times. So 45 minutes long. I would just have different classes cycling through where I was. So same lesson 5 times.
Hmm.
And I kind of felt bad for that fifth class of the day because their lesson was better than the first class. Because
Right.
I tested things on the first class and I found what worked and what didn't, even year to year. Current event jokes were funny or they weren't, that type of stuff. So my point is when you're doing a a vesting room briefing or something like that in an FEC, your end of the day briefing should be better than your first
Yeah.
because you should be testing material the whole time. I'm going to try this joke and see if it works. If it doesn't, I'm going to change something up. And when I see employees like that, those are the ones that catch my interest because I realize they're not reading a script because that's a science. They're realizing the art of communication is the give and the take. When
Mhm.
I'm on a stage, when I say something, if it really connects with the audience, I'll camp out there for another 10 to 15 seconds because I know I have them. If I say something that goes right over their heads, we blow right past it like it never happened. It's not
Right.
a science, it's an art, communication is, and it is a give and take. And so, to answer your question, I am looking for those employees who are communicating effectively. And sometimes I'll pull them aside and say, what do you do besides this? And sometimes they're like, well, my parents were in sales or whatever, or we just, I'm in theater and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this shows, and you're going to do great at these type of jobs,
Mhm.
right? And if it's a person who's not really interactive, sometimes I'll push a little bit to see if I can get them out of that shell.
Okay.
See if I can push, ask them a question or two that I'm not disturbing the group, but ask them a question or two to try to say, hey, this can be a place where you clock in and collect a paycheck, or this can be getting you better for whatever is next for you.
Right. Well, to jump over now to uh, your Story Distillers convention that
Yeah.
you had last year, I learned a lot there, and just kind of speeding this up a little bit. But you had us take 30 minutes to an hour and write our story, our personal
Yeah.
story about where we're at now.
Yeah.
And tell us the importance of knowing your story so you can train your staff of what your goal is to be. Is
Yeah.
that a clear question for you there?
It is. It is. And I'm a story geek. Like I'm a collector of stories. I love a good story. I watch reality TV because I like the people's stories. I don't care who wins. I
Hmm.
want the backstory. I want how they ended up here, all of that stuff. And you attended my first Story Distiller event, and we're doing it again this year, June 20th of this year, for any of your listeners that are interested in incorporating story into what they do. This is a one-day workshop that does that. But story is how we have passed on culture since before there was written word. It started around the campfire after a hunt where the hunters would talk about what they were tracking, how they did it. They were passing on culture to the younger generation that was sitting at the fire. And
Yeah.
everybody knew what their place was in the tribe. Everybody felt secure. And the storytellers were some of the most honored people in the tribe because they were the ones tasked to pass down culture. The Bible was verbal before it was ever written down. They were stories passed down generation to generation. So, story is a powerful motivating force for our team and for our
Mhm.
customers. I buy every Apple product that comes out because I believe their story is a cool story and it works, right? I'm
Yeah.
not going to buy it if it's junk. A story will only get me to buy it one time if it's junk. If it's a cool story and I buy it and it's junk, I won't be back. But if
Yeah.
your story of your FEC that you're telling, your theming, or whatever we want to say, brings me into your facility, if that theming, that story continues throughout the whole process, I'm not only coming back, I'm bringing friends with me. And so to train our staff and our team, what their part in the story is, what our story, like what your story at Atomic Family Fun Center is, Atomic City Family Fun Center, is a cool story, for Paducah.
Hmm.
But as somebody who doesn't live in Paducah, I don't know what that story is until you tell me. And if I come to
Right.
work for you, it's important that I know why we're called Atomic City, why
Yes.
that's an important part of Paducah,
Hmm.
why that's a cool story for our customers to know. And not only that, what your part as a new employee is in this story and how you can help people leave the crap that's outside these doors, outside the doors, and
Hmm.
invite them in here to escape, to have fun, and to make memories with their families. That's a powerful story. And
Yeah.
when you can pass that on to your team and empower them to start influencing other people's stories when they come in, that's powerful. And that's how you get people to stick around, even though we can't necessarily pay them what we'd like to pay them.
Right. So you travel around and you coach staff members for different facilities, correct?
I have, yes,
So
yes.
tell us the process. Say if someone wanted to hire you to come into their facility and you just kind of take over the communication process and train.
Yeah.
Tell us about how many a day or a couple days, how long that would be, and what you do after you train them.
Yeah. So in a perfect world, I would come in and train the entire team. Some people are like, we want you to train our leadership. I'm like, that's a great place to start. But then you're playing the telephone game. This is what
Right.
Scott said to me, and this is how I interpret it, and you pass it on, which can be effective. Ideally, I'll train the whole team. So bring everybody together, let's say on a Saturday morning before you open, because I know Saturday's the busiest day in the FEC world. So Saturday morning, bring the staff in 90 minutes early before open. I will train them for 90 minutes and I will teach them how to have better conversations with people, how to push through awkward, what gets in the way of effective communication. All of these things I will teach your staff. And then I'll stick around for the better part of that Saturday. And I'll just be a fly on the wall. I'll watch them in action. I'll talk to different staff members throughout the day because in that 90 minutes, I've opened up a story loop for them where they can tell me things that they're not going to tell you as the owner because I'm the outside expert who's brought in to help them. And it may be, hey, the owner's not communicating effectively with us. And if
Yeah.
I hear that from one person, it's not as big a concern as if I hear it in different ways from multiple people. And so
Gotcha.
at the end of the day, I'll report back to the owners of the FEC and I'll say, here's some things we're doing really well. And this is based on not only talking to your team, but also talking to customers.
Right.
I'll talk to anybody that I can. That's just the extrovert in me. Yeah, I'll cross paths with somebody at the mall. You sit down next to me at the chair at the mall while we're sitting outside the dressing room while my wife's inside. I'm going to learn who you are, what you do, how many kids you got. That's just my nature, right? I
Yeah.
love talking to people. So I'm going to connect with customers, your team members, and at the end of that experience, I'm going to be able to tell you, here's some things we could shore up a little bit to
Okay.
really bring your FEC to the next level. Here's some things you're already doing well. So
Hmm.
let's do what we're doing well. Let's use that to shift it over here to the areas that we need to shore up. Let's use our strengths to bring up our weaknesses. I'm not a huge fan of the well-rounded FEC person. I don't think there is such a thing. I think we take your strengths and we apply them to the areas that need shored up a little bit.
Hmm.
And if communication becomes a strength for you and your team, there's nothing you can't fix.
Right.
If communication is a problem, there's nothing you can fix because
Right.
it's just you're gonna be talking to the wall. Nobody's gonna be listening because you're not communicating effectively.
So that's a very good point there. So have you seen in facilities where you don't see that communication? So that person may not be the person for the front counter, but maybe the kitchen. Very important role. Do you see that a lot?
Exactly. I do. And I think, when we need warm bodies today, there's not a lot of people lining up for the jobs that we have, and I understand that. Some people, I've got a nephew who works in a paint store and he loves it because the contractors, most of them don't come in there to talk. He gets
Right.
to mix paint all day, which he likes doing. That's a creative aspect of that. But he's not expected to really engage with the customers because they're in there, they're contractors. I need my paint. I got to go. He fulfills the order and he goes. He was in a job where he was really hard customer facing and it just wasn't his jam. And
Yeah.
so moving him back to mix the paints and that kind of stuff is what he does well. And he's happy. And so because he's happy, he's going to be there for a long while. So
Yeah.
you can try employees out in different places. And you're going to have some that are going to say, I don't want to do this. Let's try it. Okay. What can I do to make you successful here? One of my favorite questions is, how can I help? You have a
Right.
team member that comes with you that's frustrated about something. How can I help? What's going on? And then we're making eye contact. We're closing the laptop if we're working on it. We're pulling them aside to a quiet area where we can still be seen, because these are teenagers. We don't necessarily want to pull them behind closed doors, but we do a quiet area and say, how can I help? What's going on? I can see
Right.
you're frustrated. I don't want you to be frustrated here. I want this to be a happy place for you to come work. How can I help? And it
Yeah.
may be, this customer just got on my freaking nerve. This customer yelled at me, whatever. Let me handle that. And then
Mhm.
you, as the manager in front, they see you go up to the customer, say, how can I help today? Same question, right?
Right.
And if that customer is just belligerent and is going to be abusive, you just fire them as a customer.
Right.
And your team member sees that you standing up for them, because there's lots of other customers out there. If this person is going to be a problem every time they come in, honestly, I don't want you to come in, right? Let's go find someplace else for you to be. If it was a one-time problem and I can fix it for that customer, they'll be a customer for life. Like,
Right.
this machine took my swipe, didn't give me the credits, took my tickets, whatever it is. Let me fix that for you, because I want this to be the place you bring your family for happy memories.
Right.
So if that team member sees you helping them solve that problem, they're going to realize they can come to you with the big stuff, because that may have been a small thing. But you
Right.
picked up on their frustration, you pulled them aside, you said, how can I help? And that goes a long way to keeping team members engaged, and letting them tell their friends, hey, this place actually listens to you and they care about you.
Well, that's I like the word listens, because I was going to bring that up next. As an
Mhm.
owner, operator, GM, whatever the case may be, we have to let our staff know that they can come to us and have that comfort. If they're scared to come in, well, one
Yeah.
thing, they're not going to have their mind on the job. They're just going to be hurrying up and get 8 o'clock here, 10 o'clock, whatever the case may be, and want to get off work. So we have to show them, Scott, just like you talked about, that we have their back.
Hmm.
And, it could be, I'll be honest with you, whenever we first opened and we had some customers like that, it was kind of difficult on us. We had to learn how
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
So it is very important for your staff to know that they can come to you, and then you got them. They're
Yeah.
the ones that help keep your doors unlocked, keep your doors open, and that's how they draw their paycheck.
For
So
sure.
very important.
As leaders, we think we're supposed to be talking. We think we're supposed to be teaching and that kind of stuff. And we'll learn more by listening than we will by talking. Now, there are times we have to pass on information, of course, but especially with the people that we employ in the FEC world, they're probably not going to come to our office and talk to us, because that's awkward, right?
Mhm.
That's face to face time, and face to face is really awkward for anybody. I knew that with my kids growing up. When they were teenagers, if we had to have uncomfortable conversations, I did it in the car, because in the car, that's shoulder to shoulder time. It's not face to face.
Right.
So we're not making eye contact. It's less awkward. They can roll their eyes without me even seeing it, that kind of stuff. So if I'm a leader in an FEC facility, I get shoulder to shoulder by standing next to him and working with him for a few minutes.
Right.
How's things going? What can I help with while we're sweeping, while we're taking out the trash, while we're greeting customers? I'm not in my office across my desk from them, because that's awkward and everything is going to be fine at that point. How's
Yeah.
things? Fine. They're good. But when I'm
Yeah.
shoulder to shoulder doing the work with you for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I say, how are things going? What can I help with? There's a really good chance I'm going to get an honest opinion from them.
Right. Well,
But shoulder to shoulder is
as
better for awkward.
absolutely. As owners, what we got to do, we got to recognize, we got to understand that a lot of these teenagers that come to work for us, it's their first job.
Hmm.
It may be a stepping stone from a second job, and they're going to, they got careers. They're going to step away one day.
Yes.
But how you treat them in the very beginning and why they work for you could change their life on
Hmm.
everything.
Yeah.
And so, go into your facility with that goal. I want to make a difference. I want to make a
Mm.
difference, whether it be with my staff member or business, whatever the case may be, and make that your business. That if this is a stepping stone, I want to be a part of that. I want to see them
Right.
come back and say, hey, I got this, or I did this, I'm doing this now, because we've
Yeah.
had that, and it
Yeah.
is a joy to see that.
Yeah. And I want them to stay here as long as it makes sense for them to stay here. Right. But if they're
Right.
going on to college, they're going on to the next thing. Like, I want them working over summer break. I want them coming in over Christmas break and working. I've already invested in this employee. And then when they get their big girl, big boy job, I want them to tell the teenagers and the young people they know that my FEC is the place they need to go for their first job because it set them up for success. It gave them skills they needed to be effective in the real world, and they learned that in the FEC world. And when you look at, the creative works people and what they're doing today, I know a lot of your listeners are familiar with them. They all started working together in the same Laser Quest arena.
Right.
Like they were in an FEC and now they're running this global multi-million-dollar organization. And they started working together as teenagers in an FEC that invested in them and set them up that they get to do a fun job for the rest of their life. I would love to ask like Russ and Danny and Armando, like, what does 8-year-old version of you think of your job today? Like you're doing what your 8-year-old kid thought was the coolest thing in the world. And that's your job as an adult. So I think the FEC world can do a lot of life skills training that we may not see the payoff of because they may go somewhere else because we can't provide what they need. But they'll keep sending us people and they'll bring their kids here because it's a happy, nostalgic place for them and not a place that was just a job.
Right. Exactly. Well, Scott, so tell me if we have some owners out here that are getting ready to open the doors and they don't know how to train their staff on communicating. Tell me how they can get in touch with you and kind of let them know the process of what we go through there.
Yeah, the website is speakingofharvey.com. If they want to email me directly, it's just scott@speakingofharvey.com. I am in the process this week of revamping the website. That should be up in the next week or two, but it'll always be live. We're not going to take it down. We're just revamping it and doing it. So speakingofharvey.com or scott@speakingofharvey.com. I'd love to talk about how we can help.
Gotcha. You have a Facebook page too?
I do. Facebook is Speaking of Harvey, but also my personal page is my business page. I always flirt with the 5,000 followers or 5,000 connections that Facebook limits you to. But, I do both. I have Facebook for Speaking of Harvey, but also just Scott Harvey. You can find me there. And Story Distiller, June 20th of this year here in Central Kentucky. I'd love to have people reach out if they have questions about that.
So can they sign up right now
Yes.
for that online?
Yeah, they can. Speakingofharvey.com/story is where they would go to find out the information on that.
Okay. All right. So give me one piece of advice, whether it could be someone, personal advice. It could be whatever you want to do to tell the listeners, give them some advice today that would be coming from you that you feel is very important in someone's life.
I think from a communication standpoint, we're so afraid of saying the wrong thing that keeps us from saying anything, right? I don't want to correct this employee, or they've just had a tragedy in their family, or they've had a rough day. I don't want to say the wrong thing. So I end up saying nothing. And the problem is the silence without rapport feels like we don't care. Right. I believe very firmly it's a lot easier to correct saying the wrong thing than it is to undo the damage of saying nothing. Because if you and I are communicating about my work performance or something like that, and you're genuinely trying to help me, I will see that eventually. Maybe not in the meeting because I'll become defensive, but later on I'll be like, they didn't have to tell me that. They're trying to make me better. Mm-hmm. So err on the side of communication, not on the side of silence, because silence will get your team looking for other places to work and your clients and customers looking for other FECs in the world.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Scott. What some of your up and coming conferences you may be speaking at, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, so I've got a school assembly tomorrow. I don't do a lot of school assemblies, but when they call me, I will show up if I can. Okay. Next week, I'm heading down to North Carolina to train the team at Stars and Strikes. Their management team is bringing all of their managers together, a couple hundred people in Cherokee, North Carolina. So we're going to train them. And then I will be at both 360s this year, both amusement 360s that Creative Works has coming up. I will be keynote speaking at both of those events.
And I've heard you do that several times.
Yeah.
I love going to Amusement 360, but I learned something different each time I listen to you, and I appreciate that very much. And I want to thank you for being on our podcast today, Scott. Very, very, very valuable information, very important information for someone's facility. Even today, if they've been in for a while, we need to really key in on our communication skills for sure.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Well, everybody, we want to thank you for joining us once again for the FEC World Podcast. Remember to find us on Spotify, YouTube, and Facebook. And we will see you next Tuesday morning at 6 a.m.
Thank you for taking the time to enjoy this episode of the FEC World Podcast with Jeff Pierce. We hope you enjoyed today's episode filled with industry secrets and exciting updates. Be sure to subscribe to this show, leave us a review, and let us know what you think. Join us next week for more captivating interviews and essential tips from the FEC world. See you soon on the next FEC World Podcast.